Welcome to Esther's Legacy, for we are here for such a time as this. And today we are actually going to be studying that chapter, Esther chapter 4, where Mordecai tells her, or perhaps you are there for such a time as this. So let's begin with a word of prayer today, because this is kind of a big topic today. We're coming up onto the crux of the matter in the book of Esther. So let's begin with a word of prayer, and then we'll begin. Our Father, our King, I pray that you would be with us today, that you would be with our study. Help me to speak the words you want me to speak, nothing less and nothing more. I pray, Lord, that you would be honored and glorified by our study today. Be with the ladies who are listening and studying. Help us all to come closer to you through this study of the book of Esther. In Yeshua's name, amen. Okay, are you ready? Today, chapter 4 of the book of Esther. Here we go. Verse 1. When Mordecai learned everything that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out through the city, lamenting and crying bitterly. He stopped before entering the king's gate, since no one was allowed to go inside the king's gate wearing sackcloth. In every province reached by the king's order and decree, there was a great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing, as many laid down on sackcloth and ashes. Okay, chapter 3 ended, if you remember, with the decree going out. Started in Susa. It went out from the citadel, went out from the palace. And Haman had framed this attack on the Jews in such a way that seemed beneficial to the king. All right? These people are against you. They don't obey your laws. And they're in our way. And we need a way to pay for the war with Greece. And this would provide that. So everything that Xerxes needed to hear is what Haman told him, to get him to go along with a decree to destroy the Jews. So at the end of chapter 3, Haman and Xerxes are sitting down, they're drinking together, they're fellowshipping together. They think they've done a good thing, a good job, right? Haman has totally got Xerxes convinced that this is the right thing. Well, news goes out, and of course it hits Susa first. And we talked about last time how when the news went out, it went out at Passover. The time of deliverance, the time of when, yes, sacrifices are made, but deliverance is remembered. Salvation and redemption is remembered on Passover. And all of a sudden, instead of remembering the deliverance from years past out of Egypt, they are now lamenting to God for him to deliver them once again. And so this word goes out, and Mordecai hears of it. And he goes out in sackcloth and ashes. And if you remember, Mordecai is an official at the king's gate. He cannot go into the king's gate in sackcloth, but he goes up to the gate. He goes throughout the city, and he goes up to the gate. Why am I making this point? Because this was not a private lamenting. This was not a private request for God to deliver his people. This was not private in terms of him not letting everyone know what was going on. Mordecai had outed himself, so to speak, as a Jew when the other officials at the king's gate asked him why he was not bowing before Haman. Remember, he told them, I will not bow. I am a Jew, and I will not bow to Haman, because Mordecai knew exactly who Haman was. So he does not bow. He had kept his identity private. He had told Esther to keep her identity as a Jewess private, even from her husband. And here we have him telling these officials, and these officials taking that word to Haman, that yes, in fact, Mordecai is a Jew. Well, this lamenting is not private. Mordecai is not keeping anything secret or private any longer. Everything is out in the open. This is very crucial to our understanding of what is happening here. He is publicly lamenting a Passover, a time of celebration and memorial of God's redemption. He needs God to redeem his people once again. And he is, in essence, not fully yet, but he is also starting to call the attention of what is happening to his own people. He is calling the attention of what is happening to the officials at the city gate. And he is asking God to step in and make a way. And as this goes out throughout the entire, all of the provinces within Persia, the Jews begin to lament. They begin to cry out. They begin to go in sackcloth and ashes. Okay? And of course, there's also, I want to point this out too, not only is Mordecai in sackcloth and ashes, but before he even puts that on, he tears his clothes. He tears his clothes. Yes, he's lamenting, but remember, when he is in those clothes, he's at the king's gate. And he tears what he wears at the king's gate. He is publicly saying, my identity is not found in my responsibility at the king's gate. My identity is found in who I am with my God. I am one of his children. I am a child of Israel, a child of the living God. And I am going to approach him. So the edict goes out to all the provinces. Do you remember? One of those provinces is Israel itself. Do you remember? And what's interesting in the book of Ezra is that we see things happening in the reign of Cyrus and the reign of Darius. But when it comes to the reign of Xerxes, in the book of Esther, things are pretty much at a halt. Right? The temple's been rebuilt. The city walls have not been rebuilt. They don't get built until Xerxes' son, Artaxerxes, is on the throne. So in the book of Ezra, there's almost a halt within Israel in terms of forward activity. Okay? So there's this lamenting. And we go to verse 4. When the girls and officials attending Esther came and informed her of this, the queen became deeply distressed. She sent clothes for Mordecai to wear instead of his sackcloth, but he wouldn't accept them. So it is her girls and the officials attending Esther, that bring her this news about Mordecai. Whether she had let them know that she was related to this official at the city gate or not, they might have just brought her news of this crazy man out in the streets in sackcloth and ashes. It's this Jew who is crying out to his God because of an edict of the king. Either way, whether they brought her news to let her know that her relative was doing this or brought her news saying that this one particular Jew was doing this. She may have asked, do you know his name? They might have told her. She may not have let anything be known yet up to this point. She may just be getting the news of this Jew acting in such a way. Either way, she realizes it's Mordecai. And so she sends out clothes for him to replace his sackcloth with. Now keep in mind again, this is the time of Passover and unleavened bread. So basically, she's sending him out clothes that would have been more in keeping with the time of the festival. Okay? In keeping with this time of memorial and remembrance and rejoicing. And he refuses those clothes. He's torn his clothes that he sits at the city gates with. He's put on this sackcloth and ashes. He's refusing these clothes from the queen that would have been more in keeping with the festival. And this is, Esther's confused. She does not realize what the specific edict was that her husband had sent out. Okay? We learn why in just a minute, so I'll hold off on that. But she does not yet realize what has happened. She is in the confines of the palace. She is protected. No one has told her this news yet. And so the way Mordecai is acting is completely out of character in terms of how she knows Mordecai. Because again, she does not know the news. So we go to verse 5. So Esther summoned Hathach, one of the king's officials attending her, and instructed him to go to Mordecai and find out what all this was all about and why. Hathach went out to Mordecai in the open space in front of the king's gate. Okay? So Mordecai again has gone up to the king's gate, but not through the king's gate. Okay? He is within seeing distance, hearing distance of those who are at the city gate. Well, those people who are at the city gate are the same officials who asked him why he would not bow to Haman. And so they're seeing him and hearing him. And Hathach goes out to that open space in front of the city gate to go to Mordecai, to find out what is going on, to be able to bring word back to the queen, to Queen Esther. Verse 7, and Mordecai told him everything that had happened to him and exactly how much silver Haman had promised to put in the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the decree for their destruction issued in Shushan, so that he could show it to Esther, explain it to her, and then instruct her to approach the king and intercede with him and implore his favor on behalf of her people. Hathach returned and told Esther what Mordecai had said. Okay, let's break this down. So Mordecai tells Hathach precisely what had happened to him. In other words, he's revealing his part in all of this. I would not bow to Haman because Haman is an Agagite, an Amalekite, an enemy of our people. God said he would be at war with the Amalekites from generation to generation, and I would not bow to this enemy of our God. I did not do it. And because I did not do it, not only is Haman coming after me, he's coming after our people. He also tells Esther how much silver has been promised to the king, basically to reimburse him for the war with Greece. How much silver has been promised to him. Isn't it interesting that Mordecai actually knows that number? Remember, there was a tablet that was found in a city south of Babylon that had the name of Mordecai on it as an official of Xerxes' court at the king's gate of King Xerxes. And that official at Xerxes' gate was an accountant whose name was Mordecai. So Mordecai knows the exact amount Haman has promised to give to the king. That would make complete sense if, in fact, the Mordecai on that tablet found in that city south of Babylon is the Mordecai of the book of Esther. Got that? He knows that amount. He's heard that amount. Okay? And that amount has been promised to be put into the royal treasury. He also gives Hatak a copy of the decree for the destruction of the Jews. A copy that was, issued there in Susa, that went out at Passover. He says, take this to her, basically read it to her, explain it to her. Not that Esther could not read. I believe coming up in a household like Mordecai's, I'm sure she could read. But to read it to her and explain it to her. Probably the explanation came in terms of Mordecai's part in all of this, but also this would have come as a shock to Esther. So go ahead and explain it to her, get her past the shock, make sure she understands what's going on. Again, she was protected in the palace. And ask her to go to the king on behalf of her people. In other words, Mordecai is telling her, it is time to reveal who you are. I have done that. Now it is time for you to do that. The time for our silence, Esther, is over. We must now speak. And so Hatak goes back and gives that message to Esther. In verse 10, then Esther spoke to Hatak and gave him this message for Mordecai. All the king's officials, as well as the people of the royal provinces, know that if anyone, man or woman, approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, there is just one law. He must be put to death unless the king holds out the gold scepter for him to remain alive. And I haven't been summoned to the king for the past 30 days. We now learn why Esther going to King Xerxes is going to be a problem. She has not been summoned for 30 days. That does not mean she has not had a private conversation with her husband in 30 days. That does not mean they haven't met privately in 30 days or been husband and wife those 30 days. Doesn't mean they haven't seen each other for 30 days. What that means is she has not been summoned as queen to her husband's royal court for 30 days. And just because she is queen does not give her permission to just show up at his royal court without having been summoned by her king. This is a matter of the courtroom. This is not a matter of their private life as husband and wife. But Esther, understanding these things, knowing that she has not been summoned, knowing that if she goes, it could cost her her life, knowing the law that the royal scepter must be put out in order for her to live, she is nervous, even as queen, in approaching the king. She knows her husband. She also knows that there are times, ladies, you know this, there are times when you approach your husband with issues and times you do not. If he is extremely busy or has something else going on, when he is not able to give you his full attention as to what you need to tell him, that is not the time to go to your husband, right? You need to make sure that he's going to hear what you say. Well, same thing here. Not only does she need to go in an appropriate time to make sure her husband hears exactly what she's telling him, that he's not distracted by other matters, but also that he is even pleased to see her. Remember, that idea of being pleasing and that idea of pleasure is very much a part of our story in the book of Esther. Vashti displeased Xerxes. Esther wants to please him. Okay? So all of this is playing a role in her apprehension of going in to her husband's court. However, Mordecai has a reply for her. Verse 12, upon being told what Esther had said, Mordecai asked them to give Esther this answer. Don't suppose that merely because you happen to be in the royal palace, you will escape any more than the other Jews. For if you fail to speak up now, relief and deliverance will come to the Jews from a different direction. But you and your father's family will perish. Who knows whether you didn't come into your royal position precisely for such a time as this? This is a huge answer. Ultimately, Mordecai is telling her, yes, I know the law. Yes, I know what it could mean. But Esther, irregardless of what it could mean, you need to go anyway. You need to reveal who you are. It is time. And it is time for you to intercede for your people. Okay? He tells her, don't suppose that merely because you happen to be in the royal palace, you will escape any more than the other Jews. In other words, it will come to be known, Esther, that you are a Jew. You're not going to escape this tragedy if you keep silent. Okay? And that idea of staying silent actually carries with it the idea to conceal or to keep in secret. Don't hold on to this secret anymore, Esther. Yes, Ecclesiastes 3 verse 7 tells us there's a time to be silent and a time to speak. But this was not the time for Esther to be silent. I want to pause here for a minute and talk about our world. What's going on today in our culture, even on social media. There are people who are nervous about speaking the truth, saying what they think, because they don't really want anyone else to know. And again, there is a time and place for that. Okay? But there is also a time to reveal who we are and what we believe. There is a time to stand for truth and what is right. There is a time to stand up for people who may not be able to stand up for themselves or don't need to stand up alone, or even if you are in a position to be a spokesman for those people. Right? We see that with the right to life, with the abortion issue. Unborn children cannot speak for themselves. They need to have someone speak for them. That is just one example. But as things get more chaotic in our world, and when we put things out, when we speak in the public arena, as Mordecai was doing, when we speak in the public arena, which today is in a lot of ways social media, we reveal ourselves, we reveal what we think, what we believe, and it is out there for everyone to see, for everyone to criticize, for everyone to dissect. It was the same for Mordecai. Again, he was saying these things at the city gate. He might have not have went in, but he was right there at it. Right there in front of the officials who he had told he would not bow to Haman because he was a Jew. He had revealed that at the city gate. And now they are seeing this Jew, this proud Jew, in sackcloth and ashes, because an order and a decree from the king has come out saying that all Jews will be destroyed. So yes, there is a time to be silent, but there is also a time to speak, and we need to know the difference between those things. We need to be willing to stand up for others and not just ourselves. Mordecai is not lamenting because he was targeted. He is lamenting and he is crying out to God because his people have been targeted. The people of God have been targeted. There are elements in our world, there are elements even on social media that are very much against the people of God today. Do we let those things stand? Do we stand up for the people of God, regardless of what it may cost us? Because Mordecai makes it clear that not only will she not, escape, but also her family will not escape. Her father's household will not escape. And to be completely honest, we do not know entirely what that means. We don't know if that means possibly her children with Xerxes at this point. We don't know if it means possible brothers or sisters or aunts or uncles or cousins or just her and Mordecai. Either way, it's just not her life that is on the line. It is her family's life that is on the line, as well as her entire people. so now is not the time to stay silent. Now is not the time to conceal. Now is not the time to be in secret. So we are finally seeing Mordecai ordering Esther to reveal who she is. She had obeyed him all this time. She has been queen for 5 years, and she has obeyed him. Will she obey him this time? Will she obey her father and reveal who she is? In a very dangerous situation, not a neutral situation. She's going to reveal herself in a time when her life could end immediately. She's not going to reveal herself privately to her husband. Let that sink in for a minute. What she is about to do is, just like Mordecai, is very public. Very public. So she's taking all of this in. And Mordecai even adds, for if you fail to speak up now, if you remain silent, if you keep this a secret, if you continue to conceal it, relief and deliverance will come to the Jews from a different direction. God will find a different way. God will find a way to deliver his people, Esther. There's a couple words here I want to hit. The idea of relief and deliverance. In the Hebrew, this idea of relief. Okay, deliverance, of course, is redemption, salvation, deliverance, rescue from the enemy. But this idea of relief carries with it this idea of enlargement, of growth, of increase. Not only will he deliver his people, but he will increase his people. That is the relief. We will see this concept that Mordecai is touching on here with Esther play out later in the book. But I believe this may be one of the reasons God actually allows for all of this to happen in the first place. Not only is he going to battle with the Amalekites through Haman, but he is also going to bring relief and deliverance to his people. He's going to do something spectacular for them. And if she keeps silent, that will still come. God will make a way. You know, God will make a way where there seems to be no way, right? This was one of those times there didn't seem to be any way. Esther might be, in human terms, what they would have thought of as their only option. But Mordecai is telling her, even if you don't, God will make a way for his people. Because God had promised not to completely destroy his people. He had made that specific promise to his people. That even when they disobeyed, and even when he sent them out of the land, even when he punished them, he would not completely destroy them. And that is exactly what Haman has been calling for here. It's exactly what this edict is calling for. Their complete destruction within the kingdom of Persia. Okay? But who knows whether you didn't come into your royal position precisely for such a time as this. Who knows? Is this the reason, Esther, God put you on the throne in the first place? Did you wonder why out of all of those virgins, Esther, you were chosen to be queen? Do you not think that God was in control of that? You are there for his purpose. Ladies, we are all where we are for God's purpose. God has a reason for placing each and every one of us where he has us. And to you, your life may seem simple, it may seem comfortable, it may seem safe, it may seem like no big deal. But there may come a time when God uses you specifically in the position he has you right now, where you're at, that you thought was no big deal, that you thought was safe. Esther thinks she's safe. But God is about to use her. I want to go to a passage in the book of Joel. That terminology of who knows? Who knows? We find that terminology in the book of Joel, in Joel chapter 2. And Joel was more than likely a contemporary of Jeremiah, who was prophesying the destruction of Israel through Babylon. And so in chapter 2, if you'll go there with me, look in verses 12 through 14. And it says, "Yet even now, says Adonai, turn to me with all your heart, with fasting, weeping, and lamenting." Destruction has come. It's coming. It's on the horizon, just like here in the book of Joel. Destruction is coming. It's here. It's on the horizon. Yet even now, what is Mordecai doing? He is turning to God with all of his heart. He is fasting, weeping, and lamenting. Tear your heart, not your garments. Yes, Mordecai has torn his garments. This passage in Joel is not saying don't tear your garments. It's saying don't just tear your garments. Let what you do on the outside be a reflection of what's happening on the inside. If you tear your garments, let it be because your heart is torn on the inside. What we do in the physical is supposed to be a reflection of what's going on inside of us on the inside. Okay? So take that rending of your garments and let that show how much your heart is torn over the news of the destruction that's coming. Rend your heart, tear your heart, and turn to Adonai your God. For he is merciful and compassionate, slow to anger, rich in grace, and willing to change his mind about disaster. To relent in bringing disaster if there's repentance, if there's a turning to him with all of our hearts. God does not want to punish his children any more than a human parent wants to punish their children. And so when there's real repentance, when there's that real sorrow, when there's that real turning toward God, he is more than willing to relent on the discipline, on the destruction that may be coming. Right? We even see this with Babylon, with King Zedekiah, right? When he released the slaves, remember? God had Babylon turn back. But when he changed his mind and took back the slaves, instead of letting them have their year of release and their jubilee, he took them back as slaves. God turned the army of Babylon around again and brought them on down to Jerusalem. When there is real repentance, when our actions display that repentance, God is willing to relent of the judgment. But when there's not, that judgment continues to march forward. But here Joel is saying, turn to him. He's slow to anger. He's rich in grace. He's willing to change his mind about disaster. What if there's a turning to him with all of their hearts? If there's a tearing of the heart. Verse 14, who knows? Who knows? There it is. Mordecai says, who knows, Esther? And here Joel is saying, who knows, people of Israel? He may turn, change his mind, and leave a blessing behind him, enough for grain offerings and drink offerings to present to Adonai our God. Who knows? Instead of bringing a curse, he may bring a blessing. A blessing where we can turn around and bless him with sacrifices, with love, with obedience, where we bow before him and offer him our allegiance. And I find it interesting again that all of this in the book of Esther at this point in the book is taking place during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, around Passover, during unleavened bread. And of course, with unleavened bread is first fruits. And we'll talk about that a little bit next week. Okay? So all of this is happening in a time of a festival, a time of sacrifice, a time when they're supposed to be rejoicing of what God has done for them and their people. And it is God who supplies even what we need for those sacrifices. Those provisions are a blessing from him, so that we can come before him and spend time with him. And so Mordecai is using that language of who knows, Esther? Who knows? I have torn my garments. I am sitting in sackcloth and ashes. I am weeping. I am lamenting. I am turning to our God. And I am asking you, I am telling you to go to the king and implore the king on behalf of your people. For who knows? God may have put you where you are for such a time as this. Who knows, Esther? God has a plan. God knows where you are. God knows you are the queen of Persia. God put you there. Who knows? He may take this disaster, and instead of bringing a curse, instead of bringing disaster, he may bring and leave us a blessing instead. He'll bring us relief and deliverance. Do you hear that from the book of Joel? To me, that just rings out the hope that is in Mordecai's heart as he is asking his God for relief, for deliverance, for blessing instead of disaster, blessing instead of curse. Yes, his people have not been who they were supposed to be. Yes, many of them are still in the kingdom of Persia and have not gone back to Israel. But who knows if we turn to him? Who knows? And so Esther in verse 15 says this. It says, Esther had them return this answer to Mordecai. Go, assemble all the Jews to be found in Shushan, and have them fast for me, neither eating nor drinking for 3 days, night and day. Also, I and the girls attending me will fast the same way. Then I will go in to the king. We'll stop there for a minute. This is the first time we see Esther giving Mordecai an order. The first time we see her telling Mordecai what to do. She is in essence telling Mordecai, Mordecai, I will do just as you say, but before I do, I need you to do something for me. I need you to assemble our people, and I need you to tell them to fast and pray, to tell them to fast for me, to be able to go in to the king. I will do it. My girls will do it. Let's do this for 3 days. 3 days, 3 nights. Let us fast. Let us implore our God for mercy. And this idea that they are fasting for her is also her way of asking, have them fast, have them ask God that when I do go in to the king, it is a good time. That it is a time when he is favorable toward seeing me and is not upset at seeing me where I should not be without being summoned. Make his heart favorable toward me. Pray that God will make the king's heart favorable toward me. We even see that kind of prayer in the book of Nehemiah, when Nehemiah is before Artaxerxes, Xerxes' son, and Artaxerxes is asking him, what is wrong, Nehemiah? Because you're not supposed to be downcast in front of the king. What is wrong? And before Nehemiah says a word to Artaxerxes, to King Artaxerxes, he quickly says a prayer that God would show favor toward him, toward Nehemiah, in the eyes of this human king. And so Esther is asking for the same thing. I need my husband to be in a proper place, mentally, emotionally, to be able to receive me in what I want to ask of him. So have our people fast, Mordecai. And yes, with fasting comes prayer. God is not mentioned specifically in this book, but he is all over it. And so when she asked him to have them fast, in Jewish terms, that's not just fasting. That's fasting and praying, imploring their God to work on their behalf. And then I will go to the king, she says. Then I will go. But I'm not going to go without fasting and prayer first. I'm not going to approach him casually. I'm not just going to walk into his courtroom and say, hi, husband, I'm here. I need you to listen to me for a minute. No. She's taking her husband's courtroom very seriously. She's taking her husband very seriously. And she is going to take how she approaches him very seriously. And we will really dive into that next week when we talk about chapter 5, when she actually does go in to Xerxes. But here she's just asking Mordecai, she's giving an order to Mordecai to have the people fast for her, to have them pray, to have them plead with God. So she will go before the king, which is against the law, she reiterates. And if I perish, I perish. She knows this could cost her life. But what she knows even more than that it could cost the lives of her entire people, and maybe even her own children. So if she perishes, she perishes. And she may even be thinking, okay, if I perish, let me be the only one. But either way, she's willing to go. no matter what the cost. She's willing to walk in to that danger. I have it in my head right now because the danger zone, right? She's willing to walk in to that danger. She's willing to put her life on the line for what is right, for what is true, for what is godly. She's willing to put her life on the line for believing that God would not allow the utter destruction of his people because he has promised he would not allow that destruction. How much do we believe God when he tells us something in his word? Are we willing to lay our life on that? Are we willing to give our life for that? So Mordecai goes out. Then Mordecai went his way and did everything Esther had ordered him to do. Interesting, it actually uses the word ordered, right? This is not a suggestion for Mordecai. This is an order from his queen. This is no longer just the request of his daughter. This is an order from his queen. And he is going to follow it. We have to be willing to be who God has called us to be, regardless of the inconvenience, regardless of the danger, regardless of how public it may need to be. And I have to tell you, I have been hesitant for a while to start doing these types of broadcasts online. I've been hesitant about that. Wasn't sure. I'm like, God, I'm not. And God finally just said, it's time. It's time. And it is time for us to remember the account of Esther. It is in his word for a reason. And we are living through very similar times. And the time of this type of seriousness is coming our way faster and faster and faster. So let's not just take this book casually, the ideas in this book casually. Oh, it's just about a young woman who goes and has a beauty contest and wins a crown and wins a husband and becomes queen. Oh, how sweet. That is not what this book is about. This book is about God placing his people where he wants them for his purposes, regardless of the danger. So let's continue as we study through this book of Esther. Let's keep these things in mind because we are beginning to live some of this. And we are here for such a time as this. God knew exactly when he was going to put us on this planet. What was going to be taking place on this planet while we are here. He knows what's going to be taking place on this planet in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. He knows what he has us here for. And we are here for such a time as this. Let's be faithful to him in all we do and all we say. God bless and shalom.